Breaking news! Nice Dude Movie Night will be doing a podcast episode on Paul Verhoeven's sharp political satire disguised as a sci-fi action romp. Through the beautiful eyes of its leading character, Johnny Rico, this movie forces the audience to ask themselves, wait a second, is war dumb? So be a good consumer and enjoy as we do our part and podcast about Starship Troopers.
I'm doing my part! I'm looking forward to how you're going to edit this, by the way. You know, assembling all the B-roll to make it feel like a reel, you know?
Oh, 100%. I thought of that, synopsis of, writing it that way about, 3 weeks ago.
Okay, you've had it just on lock. Before you even rewatch the movie and everything.
Doing these, synopsises, is that how you say it?
Synopses. I'm just kidding. I actually don't know.
Is the most creatively inspired I've felt in a while.
That's where you really get that bug out of your system, you know, the creative bug. It's on the synopsis.
Well, I'm a YouTuber, but at the end of the day, I've always been a writer at heart.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That's always been me. I'm always a writer.
I've been looking forward to revisiting this movie because this is our first kind of revisit of sorts of a movie we've reacted to, but adapting it into our podcast form. Both of us have different opinions on this movie now than we did when we first watched it on camera for the YouTube channel.
Yeah, have you rewatched that reaction?
A little bit. I haven't watched it in its entirety, but I have skimmed through it. There are a couple takes that you and I have where I'm like, oh, I disagree with that completely now.
Really?
Yeah.
Because, that's, one of the few, very popular reactions that we have that I haven't checked out again.
Oh, not even since it first came out?
No, and at first it was because, Starship Troopers, when it comes to the Paul Verhoeven, holy trilogy that you and I love, also because we haven't seen many of the others, is the trilogy's RoboCop, Total Recall, and Starship Troopers, right?
Yeah.
You and I came out of Starship Troopers being okay, Starship Troopers are probably our least favorite. And so for that reason, I just never cared enough to, rewatch our reaction to it again. Even though, when we were in the moment, at least from what I remember, we were having a blast with that movie as, a action movie, and you and I were very pointed about, we understand Verhoeven's doing his thing with the news segments. I gotta say, though, watching it again for this podcast, whole new appreciation for it.
Yeah, that's the thing, is I think once the comments flowed in, is when I realized kind of how truly brainy this movie is. You know, we both knew it was satire when...
It's obvious.
Yeah.
It's satire, yeah.
But I always took it as, a satire on, war in itself, of, kind of the way it... dehumanizes the soldiers, which is still a very big part of its themes, but I didn't pick up on, the very, very overt fascist themes. The movie, almost makes a point for you not to notice its themes. It really tries to distract you from it.
Well, what's brilliant about it is that the exposition that you are given is given through the news propaganda clips. And because media in this, world that they've set up, media's controlled by the Federation, and so everything's biased. So even the exposition you're receiving is extremely biased.
Yeah. You never once see the arachnids side of the story at all.
And everyone in this world has been so completely brainwashed that, the audience has to do the work to realize what's going on here. Yeah. And obviously, it's not these things aren't overt, right? They're very in your face.
They're not hidden by any means. You see blatant Nazi imagery and a lot of that stuff, but it's still the perspective that it tells. You have to do some critical thinking to figure out what it's trying to tell you.
Right, and this movie, was not received as highly as RoboCop and Total Recall when it came out. It was actually kind of a box office disappointment. It had $100 million budget, because at this point Paul Verhoeven just could get a budget like that.
Yeah.
And it made $120 million. So $100 million without counting for the marketing budget and all that stuff. It was a flop, right? And even even critics, not just the audience, but even critics were all right, this seems a little bit much. We get what you're doing. There's no nuance here. And for the audience, it was all bad word of mouth. Watching this now, I kind of get why, because Total Recall, at the end of the day, it has a lot of what Paul Verhoeven does, which is satire, right? But at the end of the day, it has that cushion of being an Arnold movie.
Yeah, it's still a really fun adventure, and similar deal, you could appreciate Total Recall through the lens of an artsy movie about reality and what we're willing to see, that sort of thing.
Exactly. it has all the Verhoeven elements, but then it still has, like, consider that a divorce.
Exactly, and I think with
RoboCop's the same way.
Totally.
RoboCop has a lot of, like, that propaganda stuff, but at the end of the day, it's still, like, a story about this dad. It's a story about this guy, like, learning who he is, and then also Dead or Alive, You're Coming With Me is a classic.
Yeah, and I think with Starship Troopers, what makes it a little different is if you don't see the themes that it's trying to tell you, it's easy to write off as a cheesy B-movie sci-fi romp, like you said in your synopsis.
Yeah.
And so it weirdly makes it less good if you don't notice the themes.
Which is the thing that, like, when we were reacting to it, when you react to a movie, I will say, for obviously, if you're here, you're a fan of our reaction channel. When we're reacting to movies, it's sometimes hard to kind of just grasp what the movie's trying to do. I remember I had this experience with Akira's a little bit, but Starship Troopers, like, when they get to the classroom stuff, and it's very, like, 90210 teen soap opera, I was like, what's this? You know? Like, I was like, this feels really weird. And that's the point. It's supposed to kind of throw you off from the opening, which is, like, showing the raid in Klendathu and everyone dying, all the cutting to, like, Johnny Rico drawing a sketch of, like, him and Carmen smooching.
Yeah, and him in a love triangle.
While that scene is happening, Michael Ironside is giving this speech, which is, like, cold. It sends shivers down your spine, but you don't notice it in the first watch.
Oh yeah, of how casually they talk about how the violence on Hiroshima was justified and how violence is an assertion of authority, and that's why in order to join, in order to be qualified for citizenship, you have to join the army because it's like an assertion of authority.
This movie is not giving you anything to, like, grasp onto. From what I've heard, I haven't read, the book is that way too, you know?
Yeah, I've heard a lot that this movie is completely different from the book, just to clarify.
Really? Okay.
Oh yeah, and people, I think from what I heard...
then maybe I'm wrong then.
But I think it still has it still involves fascism and stuff in the book, but from what I hear, and if this isn't true, you can just cut this out, but I've heard Paul Verhoeven didn't even really like the book that much, and he kind of skimmed through it and wasn't really concerned with being faithful to it.
I could, like, it's such a Verhoeven movie.
Yeah.
It's so him that I can see that. I want to, like, before we start talking about, like, the plot and, like, what goes on in the actual movie, I wanted to take, like, a step back a little bit and talk about, like, the satire genre in general. It's kind of gone in movies now. I think, like, it's funny, our reaction channel, the bread and butter of it is reacting to a lot of satirical stuff.
Yeah.
Especially, like, satire or parody, with the Mel Brooks movies being, like, the number one thing.
Totally.
But also, we've done Total Recall. Starship Troopers was a big video for us. Something I was thinking about is I do kind of feel that, like, when it comes to... It's not in movies anymore because, like, Twitter and TikTok, and bear with me, but Twitter...
I know, everyone listening is, like, clenching their fists, like, oh, geez, what's this millennial gonna say about Twitter and TikTok?
I know. Just please, just let me get through this. I do feel that everyone's very self-aware and meta already through those apps. Like, everyone's making a joke about the joke, and I fall into that trap all the time. And there's no room for satire in main media just because everyone's doing it. But at the same time, when you watch a movie that tackles it, I feel like when it's thought out the way Starship Trooper is, and when it's, like, done in a way that feels artful, you can get the message across clearly. And it doesn't seem like what Twitter and TikTok sometimes feel is that it feels very loud and annoying.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, probably the closest thing in my head that we have to satire is probably the Grand Theft Auto video games, because they go so hard on it. Yeah. And I remember, I think it was Dan Houser, and I could correct this in the edit if it's someone else. But,
okay.
I want to say he said, like, he's like nervous, apprehensive about doing a GTA 6 because so much of like America and whatever you want to call it is a satire. Like, how do you parody this? You know,
that's another big thing. You see people who've been held presidency, and you've seen people who are in office, especially these past, like, 5-6 years, and you're like, what do we make fun of? This is, like, there. This is already there. And it's, like, kind of exhausting to talk about.
Totally.
Like, whenever someone makes a Trump joke on stage, we're like, all right.
Oh, like a comedian or something on stage.
It's the easiest thing to do. Yeah, do the impression. Go ahead. You know what I mean?
Yeah, do the impression.
So, yeah, we're all burned to hell.
We're all gonna die.
I didn't know how to get out of that. So, like, the A24 movie Civil War is coming out, and I've been yapping on about it with you ever since the trailer came out.
Yeah.
The reason, and maybe that movie's gonna be bad, the reason I'm excited for it is, like, it takes balls to come out with a movie called Civil War about America, like, fighting with each other in 2024. It has very strong things to say about the current moment, the way Verhoeven kind of did, even though he told very futuristic stories that told stories about the current moment.
Yeah, I mean, Alan Moore, I remember he was talking about V for Vendetta in particular.
Yeah,
but
I mean, Alan Moore is like the ultimate of that, right?
Yeah. He I remember he had a quote that was just it was so simple, but I really loved it, is when he said, when you write about the future, you're really writing about the present. And
that's what sci-fi has always been.
Totally. And it's such a simple way to, like, for people who are interested in writing sci-fi, right? Or whatever it is, dystopian futures, any of that. I think.
Look at Alien. Like, that movie on paper is the most simple premise, but you can, like, dig into the themes.
Totally. And so, I think Starship Troopers definitely fits under that, too. You know, it hits a real piece of history that wasn't that long ago. You know, with all of its Nazi imageries. That was less than 100 years ago. The world was facing that type of threat.
And I think, like, you and I maybe had a little bit of, like, what is this? And people at the time who watched it had the same thing. Because it's so in your face about it. Like, look, this is a satire. But I think the reason it's that way, at least the way I'm reading the movie now, is because the movie's being told by the news.
Yeah.
It's being told by the propaganda. So propaganda is big. Propaganda is heightened. And that's why the movie's that way. It's so, like, it has such a clear point of view.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me, and hear me out on this. This is a completely different movie. That's a different tone.
All right.
But it hits the same kind of thing where it shows a different perspective.
Take me on this journey, dog.
Is that new movie coming out? Or I think it's already out. I can't remember. The Zone of Interest? You know?
It's coming out, like, February, like, wide release.
I would like to see that movie, but I remember hearing a lot of the discourse around that movie is, in a weird way, the importance of showing the inside perspective on it to show that, like, this is a real thing that happened, and it's easy to write it off as like, oh, those are the bad guys and we were the good guys. The people who played a role in this were also normal people and human beings, and that was real. And so relating it in a weird way to Starship Troopers, that showing the inside perspective on it really shines a stronger light on its satire on fascism.
Well, like, the whole thing that people have said about this movie is about, like, war can kind of turn anyone into a fascist. And which is a very, like, crazy and wild thing to say, I know. But that's what this kind of movie's looking at, is that, like, all these characters are part of, like, Melrose Place or One Tree Hill in the beginning.
Yeah, they're all extremely good-looking, like, co-ed people.
And I don't think any of them want to go into career. They're doing this because they want to be citizens, and then they, like, I know Johnny Rico is just like, I just want to travel the galaxy, you know?
Yeah, well, he was really doing it because he wanted to get close to his girl.
Well,
that was the biggest reason.
Even more basic, yeah. And by the end of it, they are all, like, career, like, military people. Neil Patrick Harris, Carl, is turned into a full-on Nazi in space. Like,
yeah, I know. This cold-blooded, trench-coat-wearing dude.
Taking very innocent people and doing that kind of relate to what you're saying. Is like, these are people. These are human beings.
Exactly. So, again, I know completely different movies that I compare it to, but the perspective that they show is important, in my opinion.
Speaking of it being very overt and everything, I just wanted to take a page off, like, the Rewatchables book and kind of read off a quote from Roger Ebert. He gave this movie 2 out of 4 stars.
Okay.
And, like I said, critics didn't like this movie either.
Yeah.
And he said, this is the most violent kiddie movie ever made. I call it a kiddie movie, not to be insulting, but to be accurate. Its action, characters, and values are pitched at 11-year-old science fiction fans. Now, I will say, during the beginning of this article, he's talking about, he's like, it's, and this is on purpose. It's doing this, like, Roger Ebert gets it.
He understands what the movie was trying to say.
But he had that thing that I've been saying everyone had that complaint of. He found it very, like, one-dimensional. Again, I think that's, like, of a piece of the movie. That's what the kind of movie's trying to be. Yeah. It's like, it's just, like, one narrative that they're trying to push on you from beginning to end. I mean, the movie opens with, like, just an all-time opener. Right?
I remember we had a strong reaction to it when we first watched it, too. Like, right when it has the federal news thing coming up, you're like, okay, cool. I think I said in the reaction, like, wow, immediately Verhoeven. Oh, immediately Paul Verhoeven.
I know, right? Yeah, I think, in the beginning we were like, okay, cool. We know what hands we're in. All this stuff in the beginning, when we and I first were watching it, we were just distracted by what the fuck. Now there's a football scene?
Yeah.
Which is such a fun sequence for, like, them to do. It's just like, future football. It's inside. We wear shiny outfits.
And we do flips and punch each other and stuff.
But even that scene is establishing, like, the competitiveness that Johnny has, the dynamic between Dizzy and Johnny, how that comes back later when they're doing their practice run and they do a play that they used to do when they played football, and that helps them capture the flag. It's doing all this legwork.
It's a lot of setup. It's not just a flashy bit just to show high school drama.
It is a lot of fun.
It just happens to be fun.
Watching the football sequence is like very thrilling. I really do wish I could see this in theaters for that. It's a very tight screenplay, which I don't think this movie gets credit for. But I mean, in like the first minute, it establishes the world very clearly.
Yeah.
Like how it says service guarantees citizenship. It establishes how military and like media are governing every aspect of human life. Mm-hmm. Right? They control everything.
Yeah, and the little kid coming out, I'm doing my part.
Which I'm doing my part. I think I saw the gif of that before I saw the movie.
Oh, really? I started seeing those gifs and stuff after I saw the movie. Like, I started noticing all of them. Then there's also, like, medic! And all those scenes, which we'll get to, but still.
I mean, this movie has some character actors. That Clancy Brown is just, like, an all-timer in this movie. He's so good.
Every time
you get me?
I know. Every time he yells, I just hear Mr. Krabs' voice. It's hard for me to unhear it. I think even during the reaction, I said that when he's like... I forgot what he yells, but I remember I yelled, like, SpongeBob!
Put your hand on that wall!
SpongeBob!
I know, right?
Right when it happened.
I remember that was in the reaction. It's I feel like this is a very Mr. Krabs performance because, like, in Shawshank, when he shows up, I don't really hear Mr. Krabs that much, even though he's playing this very menacing warden.
Yeah.
But, yeah, this is very Mr. Krabs. But then I also wrote, like, the bugs are immediately established as, like, these are the enemies.
Oh, they're sending meteors our way. That was the whole thing.
But, like, when you watch this movie a second time, and maybe for people that are not us, maybe they caught it the first time, it's like, oh no shit, like, we're the ones interfering. They're even calling it, like, the invasion has begun. Right?
Yeah, well, I know, and there's this whole theory, I'm sure you've heard, that the destruction of Buenos Aires was, like, fabricated by its own government. Have you heard of that stuff?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I completely think that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like a way to justify a war with the arachnids.
Well, they're building a narrative.
Yeah.
They're creating a story for people to just be like, listen, you're in good hands. Luckily, we're taking care of this.
Yeah, well, and to justify its own existence, essentially, because if they're a war-driven way to run the galaxy or whatever you want to call it.
And there's no war happening.
Exactly. They need to have a reason for people to enlist and become citizens.
And that's kind of what pushes, like, when the asteroid, or it's a meteor, right?
Meteors, yeah.
When the meteor strikes Buenos Aires,
Yeah.
Johnny Rico's about to leave,
Yeah.
right? Because he gets disheartened by it because someone under his watch got killed. The guy's like, oh, my helmet's not working.
Yeah.
Takes it off, and there's that gnarly, like, practical effects shot.
Yeah, of his head just being wiped to bits.
Those are moments where I'm like, God, can we get back to this? I know it looks cheesy, but can we get back to this?
Oh, I know. I miss that stuff, you know? I love that stuff.
And maybe it's because you and I are millennials and we're watching it like, this is cool. And I bet an older audience is like, no, that shit looked weird back then. But like,
Maybe so, yeah.
But for me, it's like, I mean, I don't know. That's much better than like black blood that we see in like CGI stuff, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And it took, some work and craftsmanship.
Well, for me, I always talk about that. I'm like, they fucking built that.
Yeah, that's something you say a lot in our reactions to.
Because, man, everything's shot in a void nowadays. Like, The Rock releases pictures of, like, we're filming a great Christmas movie and it's all blue screen.
Yeah.
Like, oh, the magic of movies.
And here's the thing. It's like, we're not knocking, like, VFX artists because we know there's so much love and craftsmanship that does go into it.
I would never knock, like, the below-the-line people that are, like, crunching hours, because I know a lot of times they're rushed.
Exactly. Well, that's what I was going to say. Is it's overused and relied on so much that there is no longer, at least what it feels like, room to put that love and craftsmanship into it because they're always so rushed and, like, it has to carry the whole movie, just one blob of CGI.
Anyways, Johnny Rico's about to leave because he's disheartened, right? And Dean Norris gives him the papers.
Yeah. He even after, because he gets the 10 whips or whatever as like punishment, but he just can't live with himself basically.
I forget that. Yeah. There was something I read about, like, there was something pointed at about being a black person giving him that whip.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Now, I wonder if that's just people now reading into every single aspect of it, but there is something that seems specific about that.
Oh, no, but there is something. I mean, like, there's clearly this vibe of, like, kind of, just to put it bluntly, that just white people took over everything. The fact that we haven't really talked about the fact that it's in Buenos Aires, and it's, like, as Americanized as it gets.
It's become so gentrified.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, you look at the city, and we're like, that's Buenos Aires?
Yeah.
How did I not think of that? They're in Buenos Aires. Like,
yeah, it's like in South America, and no one talks about it.
The moment where, like, it hits Buenos Aires, Johnny Rico's like, okay, we gotta go. Let's do this, you know?
Yeah.
They get sucked into this war. These 3 kids that just wanted like an adventure of a lifetime, and Johnny Rico just wanted to live his life. And you know, even though Carl, he had this like he was very smart and he had like a psychic ability or whatever, there was no telling that he was going to become this cold, calculating like monster basically.
Yeah.
But they got sucked in through this like machine, and the way the movie's showing it, you is like, look how well this machine is working.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's, especially like you said, Carl, or Neil Patrick Harris's character, was set up as like the lighthearted one. How he like commanded the little ferret. It's like, oh, go bug mom. You know, he was like the smart, funny one. At least the way they set him up.
Very wisecracking too. The way when Johnny Rico gets his math results and it's 35, he pulls it up on the big screen. Possibly the meanest thing you could do. Like, what was that move? 35%. Everyone's clapping. And you're like, this is your friend? Johnny Rico, you're like 300 pounds of muscle. Punch him in the face.
I mean, speaking of punch in the face, there's a lot of casual, like, violence in this movie. Like, between each other, how, like, you say one thing that pisses someone off and they'll just clock you in the face for it.
It's almost like, and you see this throughout all of his movies, it's almost like Verhoeven's, like, just fucking making fun of masculinity all the goddamn time.
Well, and also probably the government that, in the world that it's set up as, like, violence is the way people get their way. You know what I'm saying? Like, the athlete, the main character's an athlete, and people punch each other like nothing, and if you don't obey, you'll get shot. If you if you make a wrong move, we'll whip you 10 times. You know, it's a lot of just like pain and physical violence as punishment.
Exactly. What's the big line that he said, like Michael Ironside says?
Oh, he's like, nobody quits, or
I have only one rule. Everyone fights, no one quits. If you don't do your job, I'll kill you myself.
Yeah.
We'll talk about Michael Ironside some more. I want to talk about him because he's like one of my favorite like character actors out there. I think whenever he shows up in the movie, I mean, just go watch our like Starship Troopers reaction. Like when he shows up, we're all like, "Oh my god!"
Especially after his role in Total Recall too.
Especially when he shows up as the like leader of the Roughnecks.
Yeah,
I think you and I did freak out. We were like, "Oh my god!"
He walks into this. They show his robotic arm first.
Who's this guy?
No way!
No!
Michael Ironside!
Oh hell yeah!
He's been a soldier this whole time. Which. I did want to make one clarification, because I'm assuming most people listening or watching this have watched our reaction to it, right? There were some comments that said that his arm switches. Did you ever see those comments? Like, notice it was his left arm, but it's his right. It was just our editing, just to clarify, because we flip the image sometimes to make room for our reaction.
I do kind of like the idea of us, like, changing the movie.
Changing the narrative and experience for people.
Wow, the story's different now. Anyways, what I was saying is that, like, he's an actor that was kind of built for 80s and 90s action movies.
Sure.
Like, I always want him in rooms sweating and yelling.
He has such a cool voice, too. Which, I mean, I've said this a million times. You guys have probably heard it listening, but I loved him as Sam Fisher in Splinter Cell. That was my first Michael Ironside exposure as a kid. He has a cool voice in that game.
Yeah, my first exposure to him was Top Gun.
Sure, yeah.
Which is just like, I felt like when he showed up in there, I was like, oh yeah, this guy was just... They birthed him to be in that.
He walked on set and they were like, you!
Even now, he's at a stage of his life, like, what I love about him right now is that he's working and he's showing up in cool stuff.
Yeah.
Like, he showed up in Blackberry, which is one of my favorite movies of last year.
Okay, I didn't know that.
He's the guy that, like, they hire because no one's really listening to Jay Baruchel's character because he's a CEO, but he's kind of, Jay Baruchel.
Say no more. I know what you're saying.
And they hire Michael Ironside to be the enforcer.
Okay.
And when he shows up, Michael Ironside is now a very large man, but he sports a goatee.
Okay.
And when he shows up in the theater, like, I fucking clapped and no one else did. I was like, right on.
That's awesome.
I want to talk about the classroom scene in a little bit more detail because I think it's very important.
Yeah.
While Johnny and Carmen are like kind of trading sketches of them smooching, her blowing like a bubble in his face, and it's all cute. In the background, you just hear stuff like, all right, let's sum up. This year we explored the failure of democracy, how our social scientists brought our world to the brink of chaos. Like, but that's not like, you're not even cutting to Michael Ironside yet. He's just saying that in the background.
Oh, and even during our reaction, we didn't really notice it as much as we should have. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we were so caught up in Rico and Carmen. And which is cool because the movie kind of worked on us in a weird way.
This movie is so much better on like a second and third watch.
Yeah. It like almost asks you to combat against what's in front of you and look behind it a little bit.
That's such a good way to put it. That's how I felt like this entire time. It's like, again, the movie has like the propaganda has a narrative it's trying to tell you, which is like don't focus on that shit. Focus on like these two lovers, you know?
Exactly. I mean, even the most common example that people cite is the shower scene. You know, it's a pretty famous scene because if you really pay attention to the dialogue that they're saying,
they're telling horrifying stories about their backgrounds.
Yeah, and how like one girl was there because she wanted to make babies. Like you have to get a license to have a family, and a big thing that makes it easier is serving in the military.
But what is your what does the Nakey Jakey say of like your brain, the goopy gobbler brain?
Oh yeah, he said that in his Naughty Dog video, the Goopy Goblin Brain or whatever.
The Goopy Goblin Brain, when you're watching this movie, is basically like, tits!
Yeah. Oh, naked people, cool.
Which, the story behind that, you've probably heard, right?
Oh, yeah. Paul Verhoeven.
We'll say it for the viewers.
Yeah, sure.
What if we were like, oh, you've heard it, never mind.
Everyone else has heard it, don't worry.
Well, he also tried this in RoboCop a little bit, like when like there was guys and girls in the same like changing locker room, I remember. But then there's also like, there's a quote that became kind of famous. He's like, one cast member said they would only get naked if we did. And he was like, well, my cinematographer was born in a nudist colony and I have no problem with taking my clothes off, so we did.
Yeah.
Which is, I love that.
Yeah, it's like, screw it, we did it.
Just like a bunch of naked people shooting that scene.
Yeah. It's obviously the most infamous, whatever you want to call it, scene, just because it's like, that was a lot of overt nudity for the time, too.
If you rent this movie on YouTube, it's the most replayed scene.
Yeah, you can see a little graph on where everyone replayed it.
That, and when like Dizzy and Johnny fuck.
Yeah. But there are people that actually analyze it from a perspective of like, these people are so dehumanized in this world that they do not care about something as personal as that. You know what I'm saying?
It's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and obviously, like, that's universal. A lot of when people in the military, that dehumanizing is part of the process of being a soldier. But they take it to such an extent that even, like, outside of the army, that's how you are,
It's such a wild choice too to do that, because I don't know if the audience thought this way, but I could imagine like watching this in the theater for the first time, not knowing what you're getting yourself into, thinking it's gonna be like an action space epic, seeing that scene and just being like, what the fuck was the point of that? Because again, your mind is distracted because you're just seeing naked bodies everywhere, and that one girl is like slapping Johnny's ass, and I could imagine why maybe people were like standoffish about it, but it's such a wild and ballsy move to be like, we're gonna go for it. This is gonna mean something,
and we're gonna deliver We're gonna deliver some of the darker exposition
through that it's
scene.
So smart. Watching this movie with subtitles helps a lot too. You hear a lot of background stuff and what's being said, especially the classroom scene like we discussed, and it's like, whoa.
Well, and during the dissecting the bug scene too.
Oh yeah,
that's like a really big part too. How they say the bug is like a perfect specimen because it has no human wants or needs or fears. It's just a perfect soldier that doesn't care about death.
I mean, Johnny becomes that.
Yeah. And that's their ideal. This society's ideal is for you to not be a human being and only be part of this greater force.
The greater good. We're all part of this one goal, which is
slaughtering other races that are not yours.
Get resources, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to point out one thing that was in the bug dissection scene as well. The biology teacher in the beginning is played by Rue McClanahan. I want to say I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Okay.
But she played as Blanche on Golden Girls. She's like the Southern Belle. She just has like the goggles and like hair and stuff. You can't really tell it's her, but it's the girl from Golden Girls.
This is the second time we brought up like Golden Girls on this on this channel.
I hope it won't be the last. I hope we can spread the good word of Golden Girls.
Yeah, like I want to like keep watching.
Every episode I've seen is pretty good. Like, it's a good show.
And the chemistry between them, I'm like, oh, have they been friends for years?
Yeah, they feel like it. Could have fooled me.
But that's fucking awesome. Anyways, I want to say, like, I know I'm skipping around, but I just want to get through this opening stuff. They're reading the oath, but then they also run into this guy who's like, okay, what are you in? Or whatever. And mobile infantry. And he's like, he shakes his hand.
Yeah, well, he says to him, too. He's like, yeah, like, infantry made me the man I am today, while, like, having the close-up of his robotic hand.
I forgot that line.
Yeah.
Michael Ironside's hands was a stump. His leg's gone, too.
Yeah.
And it's just, like, slowly showing, like, all these people who are so proud to be in the infantry. They're all injured, and they're, like, out of commission.
Oh yeah, they all sacrifice their bodies for their planet. I guess I keep saying country because that's just what I think of when I think of our military.
And then there's this moment I'm like, oh, we're gonna be friends forever, right? Mm-hmm. Let's promise each other that. And I don't know if like it made it clear in the reaction, but I remember when we were watching that sequence, or maybe it didn't even make it the cut. Mm-hmm. I was kind of like, damn, what the hell is this? This is very cheesy. It's kind of corny.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's the fucking point, because by the end they have the kind of the same conversation, but they're all monsters.
Yeah, well, and it shows when Neil Patrick Harris is saying it, responding to that, in the background you can see the seal that clearly looks like the Nazi seal.
Yeah,
You know?
There's something about our reaction of the movie which is like, oh, we were falling under the trap that this movie wanted you to fall under.
Exactly. So I had a lot of fun rewatching this, looking behind the subtext or reading between the lines constantly.
Yes.
You know, especially because, you know, you and I reacted to that movie, and, you know, for YouTube purposes, you know, it was a popular movie, and we've heard some about it, but we didn't know what the movie really entailed.
Yeah, we kind of looked at it being like, oh, it's the guy from RoboCop and Total Recall. We kind of know what this movie's going to be.
It's going to be a satire sci-fi romp, like we said in the beginning of this podcast, but I think we would not have been able to catch those things, even if we tried, I don't think.
You know, the advantage of doing reactions is obviously sharing that experience with our audience, but then there's a disadvantage of just like, some movies really require multiple viewings for you to fully sink in, and also some movies it's hard to provide commentary and talk over the movie without missing certain things.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing that you and I hit sometimes. Sometimes we end up rewinding, like, wait, sorry, I talked over that line, let's do that again.
And for our audience who is like, they've been talking over this, they missed this, we know it's hard. It's very
we
difficult.
try, we make mistakes sometimes, you know.
But it's frustrating for us too.
Yeah.
But that's the advantage of doing this podcast.
If we can go back and correct errors.
Exactly. And then they're very quickly sucked into their assignments. Like, and what's interesting is that Carmen and Johnny are doing long distance, right? But their stories are told kind of side to side. Like, Carmen finds someone like Xander, who's kind of her, like, pseudo love interest, and obviously Dizzy and Johnny are getting closer, and they're kind of both moving up the ranks. But what's interesting is that Carl's story is being told through the propaganda.
Yeah, he kind of disappears for a lot of the movie, but he kind of comes in those moments when you see him teaching how to kill the bug in that propaganda reel.
Yeah, and I think he says something like, I have his quote right here, where when he's showing, like, how to kill the alien. Here's a tip. Aim for the nerve stem and put it down for good.
Yeah.
And it's like this alien in, like, behind bars kind of struggling and everything.
Oh, yeah.
And when you watch it, like, a second time, like, I was like, oh, God.
Yeah, it's just cruel, you know? Even throughout, like, the propaganda reels, they kind of have this is obvious, but a lot of the themes of xenophobia, too. Of them calling them bugs, not by their race, but calling them bugs, saying the only good bug is a dead bug, showing these atrocities that they committed, and then showing a bunch of little kids stomping on roaches.
They're doing their part.
Exactly, but it's like encouraging, like, violence, you know, and blow them up. And even at the end, when Xander was about to die, how he says, one day we're gonna kill your whole fucking race, or whatever.
One
he
day
says.
a man like me is gonna come around.
Yeah, and kill your whole fucking race. Like, but I remember when we watched it, we were like, oh, he's going out like a champ. You know, we didn't notice how, like, really fucked up that line is.
Someone like me. He's gonna kill you and your whole fucking race.
Great final line by Xander.
Yeah. You know?
Well, we watched that movie through the lens of, like, a fun 90s action movie.
Exactly. And so it's cool, you know, to notice all these things now, but
yeah, man, like, really, this movie's so rich.
yeah, even down to, like, the would you like to know more? I think there's something so interesting about having the constant cursor clicking on all the different things, because it feels almost like someone being brainwashed as it happens.
Yeah.
Like the way, and it's like pretty applicable to like social media feeds and stuff now, the way it kind of feeds you the information.
It's crazy how right they got that.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy how much I can relate to, like, oh, if I log into Instagram and I like one reel, Instagram will know what I like. And it will constantly be pushing stuff to me.
Yeah.
And it might push, like, advertisements that are directed right to me. And it knows exactly what I want, and it knows exactly what they want to push, but through the lens of what I want.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before, and you know, we have to get into this whole conversation about it, but it is, like you said, kind of, it's like a double-edged sword, right? Where it's like, on one hand, it's cool that algorithms and whatever you're gonna call it, social media, can find you things that do suit you and feeds you the stuff you like. But then there's also that other side where it can easily lock you in a box. It doesn't open your eyes and ears to other things or other perspectives, other walks of life.
Think about it this way. If you get like a 10-year-old kid, everything he ever wants, all the candy he wants, he can stay up as late as he wants, there's no way that little boy's gonna survive.
Yeah.
You're throwing him in the sharks, but he doesn't know how dangerous those sharks are. He just thinks, oh, cool, sharks. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
And so that's how I kind of think about it. We're all a 10-year-old kids that are just receiving whatever we fucking want. Yeah. And it's, I could go on for all the time, but that's kind of what's really dope about watching this movie. Is that you can get something like that. Carl shows up much later, and that's after, like, Dizzy dies, right? Mm-hmm. That's, like, the first time you see him in person, and he's in that, like, black trench coat.
Yeah, with the hat, and he's, like, pale.
And you realize he's like, oh, he set the trap for them in P because he wanted to test out like their intelligence and figure out where the bug brain is, right? And when they find that out, you can see Carmen and Johnny for the first time being like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like, these characters are people that are just going with the flow because they've been brainwashed like crazy, like this whole government has. And they're like, oh, you don't approve. We're in this for the species, boys and girls. It's simple, they have more. And every day I have to make decisions that send hundreds of people like you to their deaths. And almost immediately, Johnny's like, ready to go. And it's like, we can promote you. It's like so quickly they're like, oh yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, they're conditioned to believe that the cause that they're part of is much bigger than themselves. Again, they're sacrificed their bodies for it.
And there's something so telling about like the one time they have this like moral conundrum, it switches so quickly.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, what's the quote again? I hope you have it written down where it's like, so-and-so does the flying, the infantry does the dying.
Am I does the dying, fleet just does the flying.
That's like, yeah, when Carmen and Johnny meet again and like immediately Johnny and Xander start fighting. There's something like really brutal about that fight and really funny at the same time. Again, it's Verhoeven just being like, look at these fucking dudes, man. Like, what the hell's wrong with them?
I know.
And speaking of that, you want to talk a little bit about like the boot camp stuff?
Sure.
I feel like we haven't really touched on it, and that's kind of like some of my favorite stuff. This movie has a lot of these like themes that you and I are talking about that are very applicable and dark and dystopian, like we've been saying. But it also delivers on a very fun action movie.
Yeah, with them. Are you talking about like when Dizzy joins and
when
he gets in a fight with Clancy Brown?
He gives this whole speech, and his whole move is like, now who thinks they can fight me? Yeah. Like, what an insane thing to do, and he gets a guy and bends his fucking arm.
Oh, breaks his arm, yeah, and he's like, oh, thank you, sir.
Medic! Like, what move was that? You just put a soldier down that you can't train now? And then Dizzy comes, purposely gets switched over to where Johnny is, right? Goes one-on-one with Clancy Brown, is having its cake and eating it too.
Yeah.
Where it's like making fun of all this, but it's giving you the action movie stuff you love.
It's still entertaining you and making you laugh or whatever it is.
It's a very like Top Gun coded, all this stuff.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It's coming out in 1997. Top Gun's like been in people's minds for over a decade at this point. And so I can only imagine that like when Jake Busey comes in, blonde, spiky hair, and they immediately have this rivalry. It's like, oh, it's Iceman and Maverick. Like,
yeah, I know. I remember how many comments we got when a reaction came out of telling us that was Gary Busey's son.
I very pointedly just said Jake Busey for that
it's
reason.
just like we know now. But I can't unsee it. As soon as I watched it again, knowing that, I was like, oh my god, that's literally his son.
That's actually Gary Busey's son.
And he's awesome. His character's just amazing. Like, every scene he's in, everywhere he looks, he's just kind of like this doofy grin on his face, playing violin.
My favorite part, dude. My favorite part is when Michael Ironside, they're like celebrating because they like won a fight. And Michael Ironside's like, here's the beer. And then he brings a suitcase of all their favorite things, which is such a weird thing to do. But and there's a green violin. Like fucking Jake Busey's like, score!
Yeah, he's like psyched to have it and play it.
Even though Verhoeven's behind the scenes making fun of all of this, their friendship is sincere.
Yeah. Like are you talking about like after Carmen breaks up with him? How he's sitting with him? He's like, yeah, besides, you still got me to punch around, or whatever he says.
Yeah, and it's purposely corny and all that stuff, but it like works. Like, I buy their friendship completely, especially the moment where now like he's been promoted to Lieutenant Johnny Rico, and now they're the ones training the young ones.
Oh yeah, later where they're like, we're the old ones.
Johnny's been promoted absurdly quickly.
Only because people above him are dying.
It shows leadership is very expendable. Mm-hmm. Like the moment where like the Sky Chief or whatever, Sky Commander, is giving that speech and the propaganda is showing it. And then once they like lose, it just shows again. He's like, he understood it happened under his responsibility, so he has now resigned, and now they have a new one.
Well, and they say it a lot where he'll be like, I'll be here until I die or someone better takes my place. They know how expendable they are.
Come on, you apes, you want to live forever?
Oh, at the very end, yeah, Johnny Rico's last line.
Come on, you apes, you want to live forever?
He looks like a fucking maniac.
I remember Red Letter Media said it. Mike was just like, it's just so sad. Like, when you see him like that, it's so sad.
I know. I didn't catch it when I first watched it. That, like, I saw it as, like, funny that, like, he obviously is, like, he found his calling now. That's kind of how I saw it. So I was like, oh, hell yeah.
I remember the way you reacted. Yeah. I remember you and I were on different wavelengths in that ending. Yeah. I was kind of just like, oh my God. And you were like, oh, hell yeah. I think you looked at it, like, which I did throughout the entire movie, too. You looked at it like an action movie type thing.
Yeah, like I said, I saw it as, like, he found his thing. Again, I think the movie kind of brainwashed me like it wanted to. You know? And so now I see it, like you said, I do see it as, like, a pretty dark ending.
But it's basically, these ragtag group of people that they bond. And meanwhile, it's showing Carmen, like, success in Fleet Academy. She's doing so well. Like, she's found her calling. And I gotta say, we gotta mention, Denise Richards, one of the most beautiful women alive.
Yeah, of the 90s especially.
Like,
it's like fake looking, you know what I mean?
Her smile felt like a Tom Cruise smile every now and then, where I'm like,
the whole movie she's smiling, too.
Like, it's $1 billion smile that's a little scary striking.
Probably like 75% of her on-screen time was spent smiling.
Which is, again, in knowing Verhoeven feels very purposeful. It's like, look at this, like, aw shucks, like, teenage girl.
Oh, totally.
You know what I mean? And by the end of the movie, she's, like, at the brain bug, about to kill it. Which is set up beautifully because in the beginning of the movie, she's throwing up.
Oh, yeah. At the dissection of the bus.
She's become so, like, whatever about it. She just saw Xander die, then she's like, whatever. Yeah. She's gotten stabbed in the shoulder. It's crazy. Like, in the beginning, she couldn't even handle the sight of it, Mm-hmm. But, I think I got distracted a little bit. I want to talk about some of the action set pieces. I feel like we should touch on them.
Yeah. Well, especially, like, so much of the movie, its special effects hold up really well, and they put so much into them.
It's the first movie that Paul Verhoeven used, like, full CGI, like, characters in it, which is the aliens. And from what I've heard, this is half-ass internet research shit, but from what I heard, because this process was so new, they didn't really know so apparently Paul Verhoeven shot all the scenes like they were, and then they added the aliens later, which would never be fucking done now. Everything now would be previs like crazy.
Oh, yeah.
So apparently it was a fucking nightmare.
Oh, to get the scaling right, to make sure the aliens can fit in certain scenes, that sort of thing. Yeah, I've heard a lot about that, too. And, well, they also did have some prosthetics of, like, when the characters were bitten and were waving around.
Or, like, when, Carmen gets, like, stabbed, you see there's an actual spike.
Yeah, well, the brain bug in itself felt pretty practical. The close-ups of when the little straw thing comes out of its face and the goo stretching.
Oh, God, dude. Yeah. When the face came out of the thing, it was just, like, pure, like, xenomorph shit for me.
Yeah.
Really cool stuff. I think that's kind of why it works, too. Yeah. Like, of course, the big, like, army of aliens, when they come, it's all CGI, but they do sprinkle in so much practical stuff that it feels still kind of grounded.
Yeah, they did a good mix. I mean, they got, like, Industrial Light and Magic to work on it, too.
Yeah.
That was one of the studios. They got several studios.
Did ILM work on it?
Yeah, they did.
Wow.
I remember people pointed that out in the comments of the reaction, too, because I think we said, like, when they're showing the space scenes, they're like, yeah, it looks like Star Wars or something, and people were commenting, like, that's because...
Oh, I have to say, though, like, aside from the aliens, whenever they are in space and they're crashing into ships, all that shit looks so good.
Yeah, it really does, yeah.
Like, on my TV screen, it looks great.
Yeah, I know, it holds up remarkably well. For 97, like, even for, like, a lot of the bug battle scenes, when they're all closing in, when they're all trapped on that outpost, it's an intense scene. You see piles of bug bodies outside the wall.
Which, the whole outpost sequence, which wasn't that, like, a whole thing where... I wrote this down. There's a bit where, like, the news anchor saying, Mormon extremists disregarded federal warnings and established Fort Joe Smith deep inside arachnid quarantine zone. And then it shows mutilated bodies.
Oh, he's just like a shitload of just bodies strewn across, yeah.
But that area, and then that fight scene that happens where all the aliens are closing in, right? Mm-hmm. That, I realized that 2020 Amazon movie, Tomorrow War, Chris Pratt, everything... Very good, recommend. That movie's actually really great action filmmaking.
Sure.
They took so much from Starship Troopers when it comes to that sequence.
I remember reading about that too. I found like a couple Reddit threads about that outpost with the Mormon extremists, And there are there are also theories that the government allowed them to stay there knowing that they'd be attacked by the bugs so they can create sentiment against the bugs.
Like this
look
is the enemy.
Do. The fact that they're just filming all their corpses everywhere.
Oh,
Yeah, like
that
you said.
100% feels staged.
Yeah.
Like no way it's not.
Some people go as far as theorizing that just the government themselves just murdered them and then just filmed it, just said that it was bugs. But I think
No, but that's what I think it is.
Okay, because like I said, my theory that I agree with, at least it's not mine, but a theory I agree with is that they just allowed them to stay knowing they'd be attacked by the bugs.
Yeah.
And then filmed the aftermath just to kind of gather the anti-bug sentiment.
I've been saying it over and over again, but it's like it's all a narrative. They're pushing this one story.
Exactly.
And they're doing everything they can to have this one story be as solid as possible. It's actually terrifying in the world we live in right now, how relatable that is. Anyways, before we get to that sequence, because that's also the sequence where Michael Ironside just like gets ripped off in half and then he's like, you know what to do, and he gets shot. I think the standout sequence is the big fat alien that they throw a grenade into.
Yeah, I know, the big underground alien that comes out.
That was a sequence when I watched it, just home alone, watching it for this podcast, fucking jaw on the floor. I was like, I can't believe how good this looks. Why? Because of what we just said. Big CGI monster, but when they cut to close-ups, there's real orange goo coming out.
Oh yeah, or when they're shooting the dead ones, how like like you said, the goo flies out onto their faces too.
Yeah, and then it does the action movie shit that you and I love, ironically, which is when he kills the thing and then it blows up, Johnny Rico turns around and smiles.
Yeah. You see it exploding right behind him.
I haven't rewatched our reaction, but I bet I fucking peeked on the mic when that happened. That's a shot. Come on. He has a little smirk. He knows what he did.
Yeah, I think he did, if I remember correct, but...
That happened with Akira recently, like our reaction for Akira.
Oh, yeah, dude. You yell loud at one of the sequences in Akira. He's just running up on foot. Holy shit! My ear.
And you're like, my ear!
Yeah, I know.
Did we... Yeah, we didn't discuss the raid on Klendathu yet.
No.
That one was like a... I remember when we were shooting our reaction, which we keep evoking that, but you guys have seen it. You know why we're doing that.
Yeah.
Where we were like, oh, this was the scene that they were showing at the beginning.
Yeah, when you realize, like, oh, that was the main character who was, like, screaming into the camera.
We didn't realize it. Yeah, when that sequence is happening, it's harrowing. It's like someone tipped them off, and it really reminded me a lot of, like, Edge of Tomorrow.
I haven't seen that one.
Oh yeah, Edge of Tomorrow has this great sequence when they're all about to go on the beach, but it seems like someone tipped off the aliens and they're suddenly being ambushed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, they took that off Starship Troopers. I have nothing really to say about the scene besides, holy shit, look at the amount of extras they had and how good does this alien planet still look.
Even there's so many shots of like the big wide of like the boot camp when they're all running over after finding out about the attack on Buenos Aires, and then when they're all flooding into the ships and they're about to go to Klendathu. Too, you see, like you said, so many extras in the one shot.
Why is it? I mean, why is it that you and I freak out over so many extras?
I think we take for granted nowadays that a lot of it is just covered up by CGI, and we can tell, and we can, we can let it go. It's not like we hate it whenever they excessively use CGI for certain things or whatever, but when you see it like authentic, when they're all in costumes, wearing the helmets and real armor, it's like cool to see that they achieve something of that magnitude. It's hard to pull it off.
You're building a world.
Yeah.
Aliens, James Cameron did that too.
Yeah.
Aliens, everyone's working. There's things happening. There's a world happening beyond us. It's not just these three characters in a room.
Yeah.
When they're on that planet, something that also stood out was just the set of it all. Like, how does that still look so fucking good?
Yeah.
It's basically all just very blue, but like still.
Yeah, no, it still looks great, and I think it's such a cool tonal change too, because so much of the movie was like patriotism, oorah, let's all go in and fight people, I believe in this cause, and then as soon as they go in, just body parts flying everywhere, people screaming, the one girl just runs and panics and gets dragged away.
They don't know what they're doing, they don't know what to expect.
Yeah, like half the team that they were all training with and bonding with, that we had the whole shower scene with and all that stuff, the half of them fucking die right there.
And again, it's very pointed that they're the ones raiding their planet. Mm-hmm. They're the ones coming in.
Yeah.
These people are just protecting themselves. These aliens are protecting themselves.
And they truly think they're the heroes of this story.
Isn't the sequence after this of like Johnny's in the back to tank?
Yeah, back to tank, yeah. It's just Star Wars.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, he's in that healing tank.
It's literally the back to tank.
Yeah. But yeah, when the little machines closing the wound on his thigh.
They think he was reported dead, but he's not.
Yeah.
I also realized we haven't mentioned possibly one of my favorite cutaways in terms of the propaganda. Mm-hmm. It's the who wants to hold a gun?
Oh yeah, all the little children, and he's like handing out bullets in his hands.
They're all picking one.
And the kid, you see like a bunch of circle of kids like all pulling on the rifle.
I want it. So yeah, let's talk about like those final 30 minutes.
It's a big wrap up. So yeah, do you want to just talk about like after they kill the brain bug, or do you want to talk about the brain bug scene?
I want to talk a little bit about the brain bug scene because
Yeah.
I think it's very pivotal. Basically, Johnny and his boys are like, we got to go back to the brain bug planet and get rid of this thing. They get word from Carmen and Xander that they've crash landed. They think they've died. Johnny has like a feeling they haven't.
Yeah, because he's under the impression they died until they started traveling, and then he wants to split up because he's like, I can't explain it, but it's heavily implied that Neil Patrick Harris relayed that message telekinetically.
100%. It's very, and yeah, it's proven at the end.
Yeah.
Like Xander and Carmen are surrounded by these aliens, and then our boy comes out, the brain bug.
Yeah. Our boy. There's our boy. It's the brain bug.
And it's like it like penetrates the skull.
Yeah, it's like a big spiked straw kind of thing. Like basically like stabs through your skull, then sucks your brains out.
But I forget, like, what is it? Is it just, is it getting fuel that way? Like, what is it?
I think this is what they say, the humans say,
Exactly,
that they're trying to learn more about the humans, which there's a chance they are, you know, because it seems like the bugs are like sacrificing them to that. They're all gathered around watching, like almost like it's a ceremony.
Yeah, and also these bugs are like, they keep fucking attacking us. Who are these people?
Yeah, they're trying to strategize the same way so they can, you know, preserve their race the same.
Carmen ends up like slicing off the thing.
Yeah, I love that she gets her shoulder impaled so heavily, right? And then she just picks up a rifle and is like ready to shoot after she escapes.
It's amazing.
It's such a good suspension of disbelief. Like there's no way she'd be able to even hold anything with that arm.
And before that, like one of Johnny's men decides to sacrifice himself.
Oh yeah, Father Gabriel is what I'm calling because he played as him on Walking Dead.
Oh my god, he did!
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like kind of the last Walking Dead season I ever watched. When Father Gabriel was introduced and all that.
Oh yeah, probably around season 7 is where you left off, right? Or season 6?
6.
Okay.
That was when I'm like, yeah, I'm done now.
Yeah, he was a big character later on from what I hear.
Yeah, it was not because of Father Gabriel, by the way.
Father Gabriel made me
rage quit Walking Dead.
Of all the things that happened in that show, Father Gabriel was the least problematic character.
Here's my 1-hour video essay on Father Gabriel. Yeah, and they get the brain bug, right? The most haunting moment for me is when Neil Patrick Harris comes out and it starts to read his mind.
Yeah.
And he's like, they're afraid. They're afraid.
Everyone's pumped that they scared them.
It's like very haunting, especially because he's in its whole Nazi uniform.
Yeah, I know. And then that's when they have their final kind of where they're all walking together, all completely different people.
But very bookending it from that like whole like we'll always be friends, right?
Yeah.
It also shows how the brain bug's is severely being probed.
Oh yeah, they're basically torturing it. Yeah, they're probing it for information.
But it pops up text, know your foe!
Yeah, exactly.
In like this big gold.
They're filming it to make people think like, oh yeah.
But the idea of them rhyming it, like they're writing, it reminds me of that BoJack joke. It's like, who wrote this? The alliteration of this.
Yeah, the whale and the news sequences on BoJack Horseman.
Until their diabolically displaced D is demonstrably displayed once more. Can we cool it with the alliteration? Who wrote this copy?
God, BoJack. I'm watching that show. I'm so glad I'm finally watching it.
Yeah. I'm almost done with it.
And yeah, I basically wrote down, goes through each of the 3 principal characters and how they've become full career fascists.
Yeah. Happy ending.
What's the final line? Is it like keep fighting?
Well, oh yeah, the text comes up saying, yeah, we'll keep fighting and we will win, or something like that.
Yeah. This whole movie could be looked at as like fake war propaganda for people who live in this world that want to join. They can watch this movie being like, oh, they did it at the end. They won and they stayed friends. Look, those 3 are still together. You can maintain friendship in this dark world.
Yeah, pretty much.
So like someone like Johnny Rico in a classroom could watch this movie on a Friday when the teacher pulls out the TV and just be like, yeah.
Let go, guys.
It's wild.
No, I know. It is cool to watch it. Like, I feel like both of us have a big 180 on the way we interpret this movie now. You know, at least for me, speaking for myself.
1,000% for me, yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to recommend this podcast, this episode, like, through the reaction channel. I'll write a community post like, hey, did you guys like our reaction to this? You should hear what we have to say about it now.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Like, listen, it's been a year. Yeah. The world's changed, we've changed. This felt like a very chaotic podcast, but I feel like we got a lot out of our system because I think there's so much to say about this movie. Like, I had, like, so many pages of notes, and at some point I had to be like, I gotta stop.
I need to chill. Yeah, I know. There's a lot to talk about, which is what's cool.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed our Starship Troopers podcast almost a year after we did the reaction.
Over a year, yeah.
We gotta start doing this. We gotta like kind of revisit our older reactions at podcast forums.
Yeah.
I think that'd be fun. If you guys have like any suggestions of like, oh, we love this reaction, we'd love to hear a podcast on it, leave it in the comments down below.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for supporting this channel. Thank you so much to our patrons for supporting us in general. Last but not least, stay nice, dudes.